Police dog refuses to let pilot board the plane. The shocking truth left everyone speechless. What started as a routine shift at Seattle Airport took a sudden turn when a canine unexpectedly blocked the path of a seasoned pilot about to step into the cockpit. No one understood what was going on. No one expected that quiet act to trigger a chain of events that would leave the entire security team holding their breath. How could a dog know something that every scanner missed? And what made it defy orders just to block a human being? If you've ever believed in intuition, those quiet, eerie gut feelings that somehow turn out to be right, this is the story for you. Stick with us, because what Thor discovered, no one saw coming. Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. 4:12 a.m. Thick fog blanketed runway 7, stretching like a silvery gray curtain that swallowed the guiding lights whole. Inside the North Cargo Terminal, only a handful of security staff were switching shifts. The sound of metal carts rolling across concrete echoed through the cold emptiness. Nobody liked the night shift in the cargo zone. It was isolated, unnaturally quiet, and in winter, the chill cut straight to the bone. Pilot Garrett Hoyle stepped out from the crew-only security checkpoint. Tall, with neatly kept salt and pepper hair and sun-worn skin, he carried himself with calm authority. With over 20 years of experience flying transoceanic routes, he was a trusted name among freight carriers, especially for urgent midnight hauls. Today, he was flying Flight LX-207, a special cargo run to Frankfurt carrying medical equipment and defense components. Time was tight. A snowstorm was closing in on the East Coast, and the flight couldn't afford even a minute's delay. Hoyle moved with steady rhythm, every gesture precise like clockwork. Only his eyes seemed heavier than usual. Not tired, not anxious, just empty. At the far end of the terminal, Thor, a German shepherd with the airport's canine security team, was finishing a final sweep with his handler, Erica Valdez. She was one of the youngest handlers ever cleared to patrol the cargo sector solo, and Thor was her first partner. Thor wasn't the kind of dog that turned heads at first glance. No shiny golden coat, no sparkling eyes. His fur was deep black, slick with mist, his muscles tight under a thick, damp coat. What made him stand out was the silence. Thor rarely barked. He sniffed and stood still. Silent, just like the time he saved a child trapped under a bomb shelter during the warehouse fire in Montana. Silent, like when he detected an explosive hidden inside a disguised aircraft battery in Texas. In those moments, Thor didn't bark. He simply refused to move. And when Thor stood still, people knew to stop. Garrett Hoyle rolled his suitcase toward the final security gate, where Thor and Valdez were stationed. The young woman looked up with a polite smile. "Morning, Captain?" Hoyle nodded, his voice low. "I've got 35 minutes till takeoff." Valdez motioned for Thor to do his routine check. The dog circled the suitcase, then approached Hoyle. One pass on the right, one on the left. Nothing. Then suddenly, as Hoyle stepped closer to the cockpit gate, Thor froze, all four legs stiff, head slightly raised, nose locked downward, aimed straight at the pilot's shoes. Valdez frowned a little. "Thor?" No bark, no lunge. There was just a dog standing in the middle of the walkway, not moving, not blinking. "What's up with him?" Hoyle asked, one hand resting on his suitcase handle. Valdez stepped forward and gave the leash a gentle tug. "Thor, let's go." No movement. Hoyle shrugged and let out a sigh. Maybe she needs coffee. Valdez tried to smile, but concern flickered in her eyes. She changed the command, signaled for Thor to back up. Nothing. Thor stayed put, right in the center of the path to the plane. As if he'd seen something no one else could. Valdez crouched beside him, studying his expression. No growl, no trembling, but his eyes were tight, like a drawn bowstring, fully locked in. "I need to run a few more checks," she said, trying to stay calm as she spoke into her internal radio. "Is this an emergency? That cargo can't be delayed." "Not an emergency, but Thor doesn't act like this unless there's a reason." Another security officer approached. "Valdez, we've got 30 minutes. If there's nothing concrete, he needs to be cleared." Valdez swallowed hard, grip tightening on the leash. Thor still didn't move. A gust of cold air swept through the door behind them, catching the edge of her jacket. And in that moment, Valdez knew. Something was wrong. Very wrong. In that quiet shadow, no alarms, no drawn weapons, there was only a dog refusing to let a pilot board his plane. And from that moment of silence, a chain of events no one saw coming began to unfold. Garrett Hoyle stood still, hand resting on his suitcase handle, eyes fixed on the dog in front of him. He had flown to over 30 countries, passed through the toughest checkpoints in Doha, Frankfurt, Narita, but never, not once, had he been stopped by a dog. Valdez let out a slow breath, crouched slightly, and gave a soft command into Thor's ear. "Clear, Thor. Move." Thor didn't budge, no growling, no signs of aggression. He just stood there, like a living statue in the middle of the path, his eyes locked on Hoyle with a cold, focused intensity. "What's wrong with him?" a voice called out from behind. It was Paul Torres, the head of the ground crew, just arriving to check the cargo manifest. Valdez didn't answer right away. Her hand tightened around the leash again. "Thor, heel?" For the first time in nearly a year of working together, Thor didn't obey. Valdez felt the entire terminal freeze. She glanced at Hoyle. He was still standing tall, showing no signs of concern. In fact, he leaned down slightly, reaching a hand out toward Thor with a friendly tone. "Hey boy, I'm a friend." And in that instant, Thor stepped back half a pace. Not out of fear, but as if avoiding him. The silence had stretched too long. Valdez stood up straight and spoke into her radio. "Requesting command for further verification. Thor is denying clearance for pilot Garrett Hoyle. I need a decision on how to handle this exception." A voice crackled back through the radio almost immediately. "You sure? He already cleared crew security," the voice on the radio asked. "I'm sure," Valdez replied. "Thor's never done this. Not once. I don't think this is a mistake." "Valdez," Torres said quietly, pulling her aside and lowering his voice. "You understand what happens if we delay that pilot, right? This is a nationally prioritized shipment. All paperwork checks out. He's a 20-year flight captain with a spotless record." Valdez looked at him, then at Thor. The dog was still standing there, in full alert posture, head lowered, weight forward. There was nothing in his eyes that suggested confusion. "No smuggling signs, no contraband, no weapons," Torres continued. "Just one pilot, 2 bags, and a flight plan cleared by Washington." "You're forgetting something," Valdez said, her voice low and steady. "Thor doesn't sniff people. He sniffs intent." Garrett Hoyle remained calm. No complaints, no phone calls, no signs of urgency. He just stood there, hands in the pockets of his flight jacket, watching people move around him with polite patience. That calm was strange. Valdez knew. Innocent people usually get impatient. They ask questions. They react. They get confused. But Hoyle? It was like he'd been expecting this. 10 minutes passed. Flight control was in contact with Central Airport security, working on a final decision. Valdez knelt beside Thor, placing a hand on his chest. His heart was pounding, breathing sharp. "What are you seeing, huh, Thor?" No answer, of course. But Thor shifted slightly, and his nose touched down, just lightly, on the floor, right in front of Garrett Hoyle's left shoe. One soft touch, like he was drawing a question mark on the cold concrete. Valdez keyed her radio again. "It's not the person. Thor's picking up something, under the floor. I need to inspect the aircraft cabin immediately, especially the area beneath the cockpit. We did a full check after maintenance this morning." Torres cut in. "It hasn't even left the tech gate yet. There's no way anything's wrong in there." Valdez looked him dead in the eye. "Thor doesn't care if maintenance had time or not. He only cares that something's off." A beat of silence. Then finally, the voice from the radio, "Approved. Proceed with cabin inspection." Hoyle gave a slight shrug. "So I just wait here?" Valdez nodded. "That's right, and I'm sorry, but I need you to take off your shoes." For the first time, Hoyle's expression changed, just a flicker, but it was enough for Valdez to know, without a doubt. Thor was right. The hallway and the maintenance wing stayed bathed in that cold fluorescent light. Garrett Hoyle sat quietly on a metal bench near the waiting area, arms crossed, eyes calmly tracking every person moving around him. He didn't look tense, but he wasn't relaxed either. His silence made the air feel even stranger. 4 security officers were now on scene, along with 2 specialized aviation safety technicians. Valdez stood beside Thor, hand resting lightly on the leash, as one of the techs began searching Hoyle's luggage. "Suitcases clean," the first one said after a few minutes. "Just clothes, personal items, flight documents." The second technician went through the carry-on bag. 1 tablet, power bank, flight paperwork, no suspicious electronics, no explosives, no signs of tampering. Valdez gave a slight nod, eyes still locked on Thor. The dog now sat close at her side, head lowered, nose occasionally brushing the floor. He showed no reaction to the luggage, never glanced at Hoyle. His focus stayed fixed on the area near where the pilot had stood before. A TSA agent stepped forward. "We need to search his person." Garrett stood without hesitation, arms out to his sides before anyone asked. "Go ahead, I've got nothing to hide." The search took less than 5 minutes. No unusual metal, no signs of concealed devices, no chemical traces. The result? Completely clean. Valdez wasn't surprised. She just kept watching Thor. The dog remained still, silent, eyes locked on a patch of floor, just a few steps from Garrett's position. Thor wasn't watching the man. He was watching something else, something no one else could see. "Valdez," someone called. "I think it's time to let him board. Everything checks out." "No," Valdez said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was firm. "Thor's still on alert. I've never seen him stay locked on a single spot this long without a reason." "You know how much trouble this is going to cause?" the voice pressed. "Garrett's the lead pilot, and this flight can't be delayed. Plus, the aircraft's already been through 2 maintenance checks this morning. There's no reason to inspect the cockpit again." Valdez turned to face him, eyes steady. "Thor's never been wrong. I'll take full responsibility if I'm wrong. But I'm not letting this slide." Thor stood. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply walked, slowly, toward the door leading to the cargo plane parked at the tech gate. He stepped onto the exact spot where Garrett Hoyle had stood minutes earlier, right near the metal ramp leading into the cockpit. Then he stopped and sat. No alarm went off, but every single person in that maintenance hall froze. The silence was crushing. Thor sat facing the aircraft door. He didn't look back at Valdez. He didn't wait for a command. He didn't move. It was as if he was guarding something that hadn't happened yet. Valdez walked slowly to his side. She crouched down, hand resting lightly on his back. Thor's body was taut beneath her touch, not from fear, from complete focus. "What are you seeing?" she whispered. "It's not the man. Is it something behind him?" A voice came through the radio. "Valdez, the flight crew is waiting on a final decision. There are no signs of violation. Without a clear directive, we'll have to authorize takeoff." Valdez didn't respond. She kept her eyes on Thor. Then she stood. "Requesting inspection of the floor beneath the cockpit," she said. "Specifically, under the pilot's seat." "You're kidding, right?" one of the technicians blurted out. "We'd have to remove the entire seat assembly. That'll take at least an hour. The flight can't be delayed any further." Valdez simply repeated, "Check it. If there's nothing, I'll file the report and take full responsibility." She didn't need to look at Thor to know he wasn't leaving that spot. Not while he could still sense that something wasn't right. Garrett Hoyle remained seated. He didn't even ask why he was still being held. His face was unreadable. But to Valdez, that calm was exactly what made him feel off. Thor stayed where he was, right at the threshold of the plane, like a gatekeeper. And the door behind him hadn't opened yet. 2 technicians in reflective vests stepped into the cockpit of cargo flight LX-207. Valdez followed close behind with Thor, who moved with the calm presence of a soldier entering his own territory. The cabin was empty. No engine hum, no voices, just the low, hollow thud of footsteps on the metal floor. "Start with the cockpit," Valdez said clearly. "Focus on the floor beneath the pilot's seat." One tech crouched down to release the seat lock. The other opened the access panels below the central control board. The pilot's seat slid back, revealing the aluminum maintenance flooring beneath. Valdez kept a firm hold on Thor's leash, but the moment they approached the foot control section, where the rudder pedals connect directly to the mechanical nav system, Thor growled. Low, sharp, focused. Not out of fear, out of certainty. A low, steady sound rumbled from Thor's chest. It wasn't an alert bark, it was a warning. The kind of sound Valdez had only heard once before, 6 months ago, when Thor sniffed out a low-yield explosive hidden inside a disguised air sensor. Valdez crouched down, eyes locked on Thor's face. The dog showed no fear, but his gaze was fixed, drilling into a spot beneath the seat. His nose twitched slightly, breathing short, quick, waiting. Under the seat, Valdez said quickly, beneath the fixed floor panel. Could be a secondary maintenance bay. The 2 technicians exchanged a glance, then dropped to their knees and began removing the bolts securing the floor frame. Just over a minute later, the aluminum panel came free, revealing a narrow cavity packed with cables, conduits, and insulation. "Anything?" Valdez asked, her grip tightening on the leash. One of the techs angled a flashlight into the space, sweeping slowly. "Hold on, there's something here," he said. "This isn't part of the flight control system." The other technician pulled on a pair of rubber gloves, then carefully reached into the narrow cavity. For a few breathless seconds, the entire cabin felt like it held still. Then he pulled something out, a thin, black object wrapped in translucent plastic. All eyes locked onto it, an electronic device, rectangular, about the size of 2 fingers, no branding, no visible markings. "What is it?" Valdez asked. "Not company issued," one of the techs replied. "This isn't on any of the system schematics, and the placement, you'd never see it unless the seat was completely removed." "It has a power source," the other technician added. "No wired connection, likely signal-based, self-contained unit." Valdez stepped back and keyed her radio. "Control, this is Valdez. We've discovered an unidentified electronic device mounted under the pilot's seat on flight LX-207. Request immediate lockdown of the cockpit and full inspection of the flight control systems." Thor remained perfectly still, eyes locked on the device as if it were still dangerous, even after removal. "We need a specialized electronics team on site," Valdez continued. "High probability this is either a remote access or activation device." Inside the cockpit, the silence had shifted. No longer calm. It now felt like the lead-up to something bigger. Something far more dangerous than just a single policy breach. "You think?" one of the technicians started, hesitating. "You think this thing could shut down the engines mid-flight?" Valdez didn't answer. She didn't need to. A device that small, if wired into the aircraft's main control system, could absolutely disrupt flight navigation, even if just temporarily. In midair, that would be enough. Garrett Hoyle hadn't carried anything suspicious on him. But if the device was remote activated, then someone else was holding the switch. Valdez knelt beside Thor, gently stroking his back. "You just saved an entire system, Thor." The dog blinked slowly, but within seconds Thor's nose shifted toward the cockpit door, not out to the tarmac, back, down the hallway, toward where pilot Garrett Hoyle was still waiting. Thor rose, body tilting forward, nose stretched toward the door. No barking, no growl, just one quiet truth. He wasn't finished yet. The alarm blared across the airport's maintenance wing. Red lights pulsed from the ceiling, reflecting off the fogged, reinforced windows. The lockdown order came less than 2 minutes after the unidentified device was pulled from beneath the pilot's seat. The entire cockpit and operations bay were sealed immediately. Ground crew were ordered to evacuate. Even though it was a cargo flight, the protocol was as strict as if it were carrying passengers. Valdez stood just outside the cockpit door, eyes locked on Thor as he moved slowly, nose close to the ground, sweeping the floor inch by inch. She knew, no passengers or not, if that device had detonated mid-flight, this wouldn't have ended as a lost plane. It would have been something far worse. One of the 2 technicians exiting the cockpit peeled off his gloves and looked at Valdez, tension sharp in his voice. No battery, no wiring. The device under the seat only had a signal receiver and a microprocessor. Most likely, it's a remote trigger. Valdez glanced toward Thor, who had already changed direction. The dog was heading back down the hallway toward the waiting area where Garrett Hoyle was still being held for questioning. No one spoke, but the air shifted. Tangibly. Thor stopped halfway down the hall, eyes locked on Garrett. This wasn't the same posture as before. No guarding. No growling. This was targeted. "He's on to something?" a TSA officer asked quietly. Valdez tightened her grip on the leash, voice low and steady. "He's not searching, he's returning to the spot he caught a trace of something earlier, but it wasn't clear enough then." Garrett Hoyle sat still, but when he saw Thor coming back, his eyes blinked. Just once, quick, no one else noticed it except Valdez. She walked forward with Thor. The dog moved 2 more steps, then stopped, right in front of Garrett. No barking, no lunging, just one deliberate motion. He lowered his head and touched his nose gently to the toe of Garrett's left shoe. The hallway fell silent. Valdez looked down. Garrett's boots were standard-issue pilot gear, black leather, anti-static rubber soles, specifically designed not to interfere with cockpit electronics. On paper, they were fully compliant, but Thor stayed frozen, head lowered, breathing in and out, his eyes locked onto the shoes. Valdez lowered her voice. "Sir, I need you to remove your shoes." Garrett didn't respond right away. He looked at Valdez, then at Thor. A long pause. "They're specialized boots," he said. "Expensive. Custom made. Took 2 weeks to order. Is something wrong?" Valdez didn't answer. She simply nodded to a nearby officer. 2 agents stepped forward, firm but calm. "Please remove your shoes, sir." Garrett slowly bent down. His hands trembled slightly. Whether from cold, nerves, or something else, no one could tell. He slipped off each boot and placed them on the floor. Thor moved in, without command. He lowered his nose to the soles. One deep inhale. Pause. Another. Then his head lifted. A low, almost imperceptible growl came from deep in his throat. Valdez stepped back half a pace. "Bring in the mobile X-ray." Now. A handheld scanner was brought in, quickly synced to a tablet. The boots were placed into the device. A 3D cross-section image loaded onto the screen. Inside the sole of the left boot, buried between layers of insulating rubber, was a small microchip encased in electromagnetic shielding. Everyone held their breath. The technician muttered, "EM shielded, almost undetectable by standard scanners. This isn't consumer tech." Valdez turned slowly to Garrett. "What do you know about this?" Garrett looked her in the eye. "I don't know what it is." "That's a controller," she said flatly. "And what we pulled from the cockpit, that was the receiver. One of those didn't end up on this flight by accident." He said nothing, no denial. He just stared at Thor, who now faced him again, like he'd known from the very beginning. Valdez checked her watch. Just over an hour had passed since Thor blocked the hallway. And now, everything was coming into focus. "Take him to isolation," she ordered. "Confiscate all personal devices. Call electronic forensics and Homeland Security. This is no longer a flight safety issue." Thor looked up at her. A quick glance, a slight wag of the tail, then silence again, waiting for what came next. Garrett Hoyle was escorted to Isolation Room 4A, deep inside the Seattle-Tacoma Airport security wing. 4 white walls, a metal table, 2 chairs facing each other, no windows, no visible cameras, no room for error or escape. Valdez stood outside, watching through the one-way glass, gripping a slim personnel file just delivered from Aviation HR. Inside, Garrett sat upright, arms crossed, posture rigid. His expression hadn't changed, but his eyes, they no longer held the calm from earlier. Thor lay at her feet, head resting on her boot, eyes locked on the man behind the glass. He had completed his first task, detection. But Valdez knew what Thor picked up might only be the smallest piece of something much larger. A technician from the emergency electronics unit approached with a sealed case containing Garrett's shoes, packed in thermal insulation and electromagnetic shielding. Rubber gloves on, they began dismantling the sole, carefully, methodically. It took exactly 40 seconds to lift the inner layer. Inside, they found an ultra-thin circuit board, fused with a signal control chip. Attached to it was a micro-power cell, capable of emitting a short-range signal, active only within a few meters. No GPS, no continuous transmission. A one-time trigger, reliant on physical proximity. "Definitely a manual activation device," the technician said. "Clever disguise. The anti-scan shielding makes it invisible to even advanced surface scanners." Valdez gave a slight nod. She'd suspected it the moment Thor returned to the boots. The delay, the hesitation, and then that look. A single blink from a man who'd looked 1,000 people in the eye during security checks. But this time, he blinked. Valdez stepped into the interrogation room. The door shut behind her with a cold, sharp click. Garrett didn't lift his head as she sat across from him. He spoke only once. "I didn't know that was in my shoe." Valdez didn't reply right away. She placed a clear evidence bag on the table. Inside, the device removed from the sole. "You know that didn't end up there by itself," she said. "And you know the only person close enough to the receiver device was you." Garrett looked up. His face stayed still, but for a brief second, confusion flickered in his eyes. "I fly on schedule. My shoes were issued by the company," he said. "Company-issued pilot boots don't come with embedded transmitters," Valdez replied. "They don't have rubber shielding to block scans, and they definitely don't include short-range control chips." Garrett said nothing. "We examined the device inside the cockpit," Valdez continued. "It was wired into the secondary mechanical steering system. If the transmitter in your shoe had been activated, that aircraft could have temporarily lost navigational control." Temporarily doesn't sound like a critical failure, Garrett said almost automatically. Valdez stared at him. At 35,000 feet flying over open ocean, temporary loss of navigation can mean death. And if that system was programmed to sync with a shift in cabin pressure, you know exactly what that could trigger, don't you? Garrett stayed silent. Do you even know what was in that cargo? She asked. No response. Military-grade tracking units, high-capacity power cells for radar defense systems, and prototype drone controllers from the next-gen testing fleet. Who do you think benefits if that plane disappears over international airspace? This time, Garrett lowered his head. Silence. You know what made me check your boots? Valdez asked. He looked up, suspicion in his eyes. The dog, one dog that just stood there and refused to move. No biting, no barking, just still, because he knew something was wrong. Pure instinct, and dead accurate. Garrett gave a dry laugh. What does a dog know about politics? Valdez leaned in slightly. They don't have to. They just have to smell what's wrong. She stood. The door opened behind her. 2 federal agents stepped in to take her place. Valdez signaled Thor to stand. The dog rose obediently and followed her out of the room. She didn't need a confession. She had the evidence. And she had Thor. Outside, the sky over Seattle was just beginning to brighten. The first pale rays of sunlight cut through the thin fog, casting a dim glow over the runway, still marked with tire tracks from a flight that never took off. One delayed plane, one hidden network, yet to be exposed, and one dog, silent as ever, who had just sniffed out a trap laid in 2 layers. Inside the airport's security command center, the atmosphere felt like night had never ended. Printers ran non-stop. Digital maps of flight routes and crew rosters glowed across the main screens. But every eye in the room was turning toward one location. The crew quarters, tucked along the western edge of the airport. Less than a kilometer from the cargo terminal. Thor moved quickly along the stone path leading into the crew quarters. Every step was firm, deliberate. Valdez kept a tight hold on the leash, eyes locked on her partner's back. Garrett Hoyle was already in federal custody, awaiting investigation, but Valdez knew one thing for sure. He hadn't acted alone. Data pulled from Garrett's tablet showed he'd accessed secure systems through a local network of unknown origin. And the last recorded IP address? It fell squarely within the Wi-Fi range of these quarters. What exactly are we looking for? Asked Mason, a federal agent, as the team entered the main lobby of the building. Valdez answered without missing a beat. Explosives, circuitry, chemical compounds. Thor can pick up trace microchips if they've been stored near fabric. He once found a mini hard drive sewn into the lining of a jacket. The crew quarters were 3 stories high. Neat, orderly, but old. Each pilot had their own private room with basic furnishings. Garrett had stayed in room 212. But Thor didn't even slow down there. The dog moved straight past the stairs, head low, nose close to the ground. Valdez recognized that posture. Thor had picked up a familiar scent. The same kind of trace he'd found on the microchip under the cockpit seat and the transmitter inside the boot. Thor turned into the south hallway. 3rd floor, room 308. Not Garrett's room. Valdez gave a silent nod to the agents. The lock was broken open and they stepped inside. The room was empty. A half-finished cup of coffee still sat on the desk. A jacket hung on the hook, and an unzipped suitcase lay by the window. Thor moved in confidently, circling once before stopping at the closet. He pressed his nose to the inside panel and let out a low growl. Valdez opened it. Inside, a plain black backpack. No brand, no name tag. She set it on the table, unzipping it carefully with gloved hands. Inside, a mini hard drive, 2 full-color briefing packets, and 1 thick stack of encrypted lists. We've got something, Mason said, already dialing the digital forensics team. Thor kept sniffing along the wall. Behind the curtain was a small window, and wedged into the wooden frame, barely visible, was a strip of tape holding an ultra-miniature tracking chip. They were monitoring someone's movements, Valdez said, her brow tightening. At that moment, the tech agent stepped in, already hooking the hard drive to a secure reader. Within seconds, the first streams of data filled the screen. Flight crew assignment maps for both domestic and international routes. Access hierarchy charts for aircraft control systems. Personnel files on newly hired maintenance staff from the past 18 months. Valdez exchanged a glance with Mason. This wasn't just a rogue pilot. This was a breach, organized, embedded, and active. This isn't a lone suspect anymore, Mason said quietly. They've embedded people into the system. Valdez froze. On the personnel list, she spotted 3 names that had previously been assigned to this airport and had shown up during inspections where she and Thor were present. One of them had even joked about Thor staring too much. It was all starting to line up. This wasn't a spontaneous act. It was an infiltration ring. Technicians, backup pilots, security staff, people with just enough access to plant a device, to unlock a door, to slip out a piece of data without anyone noticing. And what had made it all run so smoothly all this time? Trust. Trust in teammates, in a vetted personnel list, in the morning handshakes. Valdez looked at Thor, now curled under the table, eyes still scanning every movement in the room. "You don't trust anyone, do you?" she whispered. "You trust scent, the one thing that never lies." Thor closed his eyes for a single brief moment, then opened them again. Still silent, still steady. But everyone in the room understood. This investigation was only just beginning. 2 weeks after the incident at Seattle-Tacoma Airport, a small ceremony was held on the grounds of the Federal Aviation Security Unit. No media, no reporters. But everyone present understood the weight of the moment. On stage, among a row of solemn faces, stood a German shepherd in a freshly issued K9 vest. Its jet black coat stood out under the soft lighting. The nameplate on its chest read simply, Thor, Unit 7F. Valdez stood beside Thor, her hand resting on his back as the Director of Homeland Security presented a medal engraved with the words, "For exceptional instinct and loyalty in national aviation security." Thor didn't understand the meaning of the ceremony, but he felt Valdez's proud gaze, and that was enough. Garrett Hoyle, former pilot, is awaiting trial at a federal detention center in Colorado. Evidence recovered from the crew quarters expanded the investigation to 3 additional airports and led to the arrest of 4 more individuals tied to the same network embedded within the aviation system. Experts agree, if that flight had taken off, the event could have set a precedent for a wave of internationally coordinated sabotage. And it all started with a dog that refused to move. Valdez often thought back to the moment Thor stood in Garrett's path. No aggression, no attack, just stillness. A simple act with more weight than any blaring alarm. Since that day, she'd received congratulations, thank you letters, and even promotion offers. But what meant the most was a single line from a senior officer during the final closed-door briefing. "We've got the tech, we've got the systems, but what saved us that day was instinct." Instinct, a word that sounds primitive, yet in the modern world, it might be the very thing humans lose most easily. Valdez had once doubted herself, afraid she'd be reprimanded for trusting a reaction she couldn't explain. But Thor taught her the most important lesson of all. When your gut speaks, don't ignore it. Even if the whole world says you're wrong. Not everyone believes in dogs. Not everyone understands the subtle way they respond to the world. But those who've worked with a K9 like Thor know, sometimes the dog doesn't need a command. It just needs to be trusted. A dog's instinct is a blend of scent, emotion, movement, and unspoken experience. It doesn't explain itself in words, but it acts with absolute certainty. And sometimes that certainty is the only thing standing between peace and disaster. After the ceremony, Valdez unhooked Thor's leash and let him run free across the grassy yard behind the building. A light breeze moved through the air. The American flag waved in the distance. Thor made one wide loop, then returned, settling at her feet like always. She sat beside him and whispered, "Good job, Thor. You're the eyes we don't have, the voice when everything else goes quiet." Thor closed his eyes for a moment, quiet, just like the way he had saved an entire system built on trust. If you believe in a dog's instinct, in the small things that can change everything, leave a comment below. Have you ever seen your pet do something strange? Have you ever trusted it instead of trusting what people said? We're always listening for stories like that. And who knows, maybe Thor isn't the only dog with the instinct to save the world. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story from Dog Stories, where we share the quiet but always right heroes on 4 legs. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you in the next one.